Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for a very rich view of the challenges you're facing and the approach that you're taking. I wanted to start, you gave us a taste of your meetings yesterday with President Trump, and in the past you've spoken also about your commitment to take a different approach to U.S.-Pakistan relations than previous Pakistan leaders. And I'm curious if you wanted to say a bit more about what is the difference with your approach and how's that resonating during this visit in Washington, and how do you see the future between U.S. and Pakistan?
You see, Nancy, I always felt that the relationship between Pakistan and the United States was never multi-pronged. It was basically a transactional relationship. So, for instance, in the 80s, Pakistan was fighting the jihad against the Soviets. And so the US was helping Pakistan, was providing aid. And Pakistan was, the various groups created in Pakistan were then conducting attacks inside Afghanistan against the Soviets. The moment that the Afghan jihad ended, the US packed up and left. And not only did they leave, Pakistan was slapped with Pressler sanctions. So Pakistan then was left with 4 million Afghan refugees, a number of militant groups which had been created to fight the Soviets, all dressed up and nowhere to go. We had heroin, drugs that were used at some point to pay for the fighting in Afghanistan. So Pakistan, then first time we had these sectarian attacks and sectarian militant groups, which were first time we heard of sectarian attacks inside Pakistan. Then comes 9/11, and Pakistan again joins the US. I was then, I only had one seat in parliament at the time, and I remember when General Musharraf was consulting all of us that the US wants us to join them in the war. I opposed it. I thought Pakistan should stay neutral. And I'll tell you why I thought Pakistan should stay neutral. We had created these jihadi groups in the 80s. We had indoctrinated them in the idea of jihad, that foreign occupation in Afghanistan, it was a religious duty to fight them. So all these groups, including Al-Qaeda, had arrived in Pakistan. Now comes 9/11, then the US invades Afghanistan. And now we are trying to tell these same groups who had close links with the Pakistan army, because they were created by the Pakistan army, now we are telling them that no, it's because the good guys are there, it's no longer jihad. Now, obviously, a lot of them turned against the Pakistan army, because Pakistan army was then trying to neutralize them. So what we went through, and I just briefly mentioned earlier, it was the worst time in our history. These groups turned against the Pakistan army and the state of Pakistan. And not only that, there were linkages between, clearly there were linkages between these groups and the Pakistani security forces, because they had created them. So we had insider attacks, we had, the GHQ was attacked, generals were killed, ISI headquarters were attacked. The army at one point, the army could not go into the cities in military clothes or with military cars. It was that bad at one point. And then, of course, the second thing was the tribal areas. We should never have sent army into the tribal areas, because the tribal area per capita was the most weaponized area in the world. For people who don't know, tribal area is the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It was always an autonomous area. The British never occupied it during their rule since 1890. So it was an autonomous area. It ran by its own rules. So in 2004, under pressure from the United States, Pakistan Army went into the tribal areas to flush out Al-Qaeda. Now, what happened was that when, after Tora Bora in Afghanistan, few of the Al-Qaeda moved into our tribal areas, which were semi-autonomous. So when they sent the army in, armies are not meant to go into civilian areas. Whenever you send your army into civilian areas, you can ensure that there will be human rights abuses, there will be collateral damage, there will be innocent people killed, because there's no army there. They're just guerrillas operating from villages. So, the collateral damage created what became the Pakistani Taliban. There was no Pakistani Taliban before. So we then had the people of tribal areas suffered. One point there were these militants, the other side was the Pakistan army. Half of the tribal area was then internally displaced. The damage, we still haven't, the amount of damage done in the tribal area, we still haven't got the resources to compensate them. So basically the country went through hell. In my opinion, we should have stayed neutral. That way we would have had control over these militant groups, and we could have in our own time neutralized them. But because we became a part of the US war, they turned against Pakistan. And so now what I feel, there was a watershed in Pakistan, in Pakistani politics. In 2014, the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, they slaughtered 150 school children in what was called the APS, the Army Public School. There was a reaction within Pakistan. All the political parties then signed a paper called the National Action Plan. And we all decided after that that we will not allow any militant groups to operate inside Pakistan. Until we came into power, the governments did not have the political will, because when you talk about the militant groups, they still have about 30 to 40,000 armed people who have been trained and in some sort of a theater, who fought either in Afghanistan, maybe in Kashmir. So we were the first government who has now started disarming all the militant groups. This is the first time it is happening. We have taken over their institutes, their seminaries. We've got administrators there. So it is the first time in Pakistan that we have decided there will be no armed militias inside our country.
Which relates to the next question I want to ask you, and it's been in the news a lot. It's clearly a significant element in US-Pakistan relationships, and that's what you referred to as well, the ongoing Afghan peace process, and the possibilities that we might actually have some breakthroughs. And building on what you just said, is the Pakistan government able and willing to make the commitments to really help move these dialogues forward, especially in the event that the Taliban and the Afghan government aren't able to get a meeting organized?
It's just for people's benefit. The fear amongst the Pakistan military establishment was always that there would be a two-front situation. So there would be, the Eastern Front, which is India, and then if Afghanistan was also in the Indian sphere of influence, then Pakistan would be sandwiched between these two. And so this was always the worry about the Pakistan military establishment, and which is why they wanted what was called the strategic depth. But this has changed. Today, there is no concept in Pakistan of strategic depth, because we feel that by interfering in Afghanistan, in order to secure the strategic depth, we have actually done a lot of damage to our own country, and for no rhyme or reason, we have become partisan in Afghanistan's internal affairs. Now, and I speak for Pakistan Army because, normally there was that, there's Pakistan Army is this independent entity, and, the governments have no control over it. I can sit here and tell you that as I speak, the Pakistan Army is exactly behind the government's program. Whatever our policies from day one we've arrived, peace with India, They were behind. When I decided to release the Indian pilot who had been shot down in Pakistan, the army was right behind me. So we today speak as, that there's no difference between the policies of the Pakistan security forces or the Pakistan's democratic government. And we believe that we should not ever interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan. Let the Afghans decide what they want, what sort of government they want, and we should facilitate the peace process. So this is the big difference now.
Okay.
We're all on the same page, and fortunately now that the United States is on the same page too, because, after, the Einstein's definition of madness, trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, 19 years of conflict. And if they had gone, thank God for President Trump, I mean, this could have gone on for another 19 years without any result.
But it sounds like you're willing to use your leverage with the Taliban to facilitate the peace process,
you see,
which is a big welcome change.
Taliban delegation wanted to meet me a few months back, and when I became the Prime Minister. And it's because I always maintained that there was no military solution, while everyone else in Pakistan's political spectrum kept sort of agreeing that there was some military solution. So because of that, I had a certain amount of credibility amongst them. They wanted to meet me, but the Afghan government at that point did not want me to meet them. So I did not meet them, but now when I go back, after meeting President Trump, and also I've spoken to President Ghani, now I will meet the Taliban, and I will try my best to get them to talk to the Afghan government, and so that the election in Afghanistan must be an inclusive election where the Taliban also participate in it.
Great, thanks. I want to ask something that's very important to people here, and that is the view that in Pakistan, censorship and harassment of the press, of activists and dissenting voices, of women, is on the rise. And you just spoke very eloquently about a new Pakistan, talked about the inequalities that have plagued the economy. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts and commitments about also protecting the pluralism and the freedom of speech and of the media that's so important to a democratic Pakistan?
Just let me say one thing. My government, and time will prove this, will be the most inclusive government in Pakistan ever. We will try, we have already now ensured full protection for our minorities. We have, I won't go into detail, but there's one element where we still have a problem. But what we have done, no government has done before. And I'll give you an example that there was this case of Asia Bibi. She was this Christian woman who was jailed, and no judge would try them because of blasphemy, and because of the strength of one particular group, which had the previous government was held hostage by the group. They came in and they literally blocked the roads, and people were scared of that group. So when the judgment was given to free her by the Supreme Court, the same group then threatened. They came out on the streets. They were rioting for 2 days, and the stage was held hostage for 2 days. But this is the first government that, on the next opportune moment, actually took them out. We put them in jails. We just completely, and Asia Bibi was then safely, she came out, and then she wanted to leave the country, and we helped her. So all I'm saying is that this government you will see that it will treat its minorities as equal citizens. There is just one thing, I don't want to go into details, but there's one aspect, I can't talk about it, but we have still a problem. I'm not saying we've completely controlled the situation, but you will see that this is not out of worry about what the the Western world or any other people say about us. It's because out of our conviction that our minorities, according to our religion, according to our constitution, are equal citizens. Now the media. You know, I have, my life, I went to university in England and I spent about 18 summers of my life in England. And I've seen the British media, very open, very free media. The Pakistan media, in my opinion, is even freer than the British media. There is the media in Pakistan, is not just free, but sometimes out of control. I can tell you that in Britain, no media would have published things like, or said on television things like the Pakistan media has done. I can tell you since I've been in power. Imagine, I don't even think in America this would be allowed, even though the media has this love-hate relationship with President Trump, more hate than love sometimes. But imagine that, again, a prime minister of a country, and this man sits on television and says that I can tell you that he's getting divorced tomorrow. So if there was some truth in it, you would, okay, if he had some knowledge. But there's only me and my wife living together. Where did he get this information from? But this sort of thing, in the olden days, I can tell you that this guy would have been beaten up. Nawaz Sharif's time, the previous prime minister, he had journalists beaten up. Asif Zardari, people were petrified of him. People would disappear. In my time, I went to the legal channels, I reported it to the media, I went into the court. All I'm saying is that what the media in Pakistan is, you will not find a media like that. And I remember the previous ambassador to Pakistan, him saying that the media was out of control. So what we need is to control the media, and not through the government, but through a media watchdog. At the moment, there are 2 or 3 things the media did. One is that they started reporting wrongly that the IMF had said that the rupee would fall, to a number they quoted. There was a run on the rupee. Who would do that? First, you're fighting in the biggest economic crisis in your history. Second, you have media coming up with this false news about causing a run on the rupee, or the finance minister's change, and so on. So I feel very strongly that we will strengthen the media watchdog. It is not censorship. We will strengthen the media watchdog. But there are 70 channels or 80 channels in Pakistan. Only 3 channels reported that they were having some problems. So
we have a whole afternoon's worth of questions for you. But before I go, I just need to ask you one last question. It's very important for USIP's mandate, and that is the number of international NGOs that are raising concern about the increased difficulty of working in Pakistan. And, fully understanding that the government has a role in registering these groups and in regulating the space, many of them are complaining of a very arbitrary process that ultimately is hampering very genuine efforts to work in partnership with Pakistani organizations and the government, and examples of forced expulsions. Is your government committed to addressing this issue? It's been going on since before you took office. And I think there are hopes that you might be able to do something to make it a more transparent and fair process. Absolutely. The foreign minister has been dealing with this issue, and we have tried to work out to have these guidelines for media, for NGOs. I run the 2 biggest NGOs in Pakistan, which is the Cancer Hospital and the university. But we did have problems, and I can just frankly tell you the reason why these restrictions came. There was an issue of Shakil Afridi, who was working for a NGO. The doctor. The doctor, and the NGO was what is Save the Children? Save the Children. So after that, the
the result was that the extremists, militants started targeting NGOs. Specifically, we had one of our biggest problem was that the polio workers were being targeted. So many of the polio workers were shot after that. So after that, we are trying to streamline it, make sure that this doesn't happen again, because that affected the activities of other NGOs. In fact, one of the NGOs gave a statement condemning that NGOs should not be allowed for espionage or that sort of stuff. But we are already looking at it. There were 3 German NGOs which had left Pakistan, but after being cleared, they've come back, and we're looking at a case-to-case basis.
I know there'd be great appreciation for that. So, number of questions, none of them small. Here's from